Play, Watch, Listen is a game development and games industry podcast featuring 3 game developers: Austin Wintory, who is a video game composer, Mike Bithell, who is a video game director, and Alana Pierce, who is a video game writer. This show is supported entirely by Patreon, but whether you're a Patreon supporter or you're listening on YouTube or on any of our audio podcast feeds, we hope you enjoy the show.
Yeah, sorry everybody that Mike's mic always sounds crappy. I literally just said, I'll send you one, and he said, I don't need one, so...
Well, what's ironic is I've still got the one that Troy sent me about 2 years ago. So I could just go upstairs into my attic and get my... whatever it was he sent me a little while ago.
That seems like a good idea.
This is the podcast version of programmer art where you put in art specifically to make people angry so that they will give you the things you need. Yeah. You have the placeholder mic.
You're not
so you
Austin
Wintory.
Wintory.
Or mics.
Who are you? What
that's
are you
Austin.
doing here?
That's Austin Wintory.
Yeah, I'm Austin Wintory. I had a great experience at the tanning bed, and now I'm here.
All right, we'll take it. No, actually, hi, welcome.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Xalavier Nelson Jr. I've worked on over 100 games in the last 9 years. I run a studio called Scaffold, where we try to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible. We couldn't get funding at all for the last few years. Now a lot of people are knocking on our doors for obvious reasons.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I asked you to join specifically because I had gotten questions on Patreon, and people have been talking about it on Twitch when I was talking about it too, about how Strange Scaffold releases so many games of such high quality. The people need to know. And Austin, for the record, everybody, is in Montreal. I don't know what he's doing, but he's not here today.
Playing Journey somewhere in
honestly,
a concert hall.
I'm pretty sure that's all he does. He just flies around the world, plays Journey.
It's good music, but do we need to play it live so often? That's all I'm asking. That's my question.
It's really taxing.
Surely everything that needs to be said has been said.
Yeah, we get it.
One have another journey.
How many journeys are there? Sorry.
Well, 100 for
too many. Back to Strange Scaffold.
Yes.
Yeah. How are you releasing so many video games? How is it happening?
Secrets.
How do they keep coming out so well? How?
It's not magical. A lot of it is that we haven't had resources, to be completely honest with you. I built the studio in a very intentional way to say, okay, I've had all these experiences at that time, having made games with different people, talked with people I really respected about how they made games, and to a degree, realizing there was a bunch of routes I didn't want to go along. I know people who have made games that literally change the way we talk about and make games. And they can't look at those projects with joy because they're like, yeah, you become friends with them and they're like, yeah, people do love that game, but it didn't make enough money for us to go into recoup. So we were never able to hire on everyone full time and then do healthcare and start the next one. So it gets burned in their minds. And the idea of having put in all the time and effort it takes to make a video game and not being able to feel good about it because it didn't fulfill the purpose it needed, which is letting you make the next one for your players, that broke my heart. It really got to me. I learned after working on Hypnospace Outlaw, for those who are not familiar, that, man, even I wasn't the main driver of that project. I was the narrative lead, but being in the room on a project that's been going for 5-6 years, and then it comes out, and everything builds to that point, and then you have this giant depression afterwards, just the wave of exhaustion. Even when it goes well, as it did for Hypnospace, I was like, man, there's all these things I don't want to happen for a studio. There's all these ways I do want to work because I know how my brain works. I'm neurodivergent. If I'm stuck in a room with just one thing to focus on for 3 years, I'll die. That culminated in just trying to set up a studio with its inherent structures to align towards those goals.
I guess that happen. It's obvious, but the only way that the system you have set up makes sense is if you set it up from the jump, which is what it sounds like. There is I guess in my head, I'm like, wow, are they just making these games and churning them out? But of course the answer is no, it was meticulously planned for us to have this output rate, like, from the start. And it's, like, stupid that I didn't put those things together, because literally, how else could you do it?
Doesn't happen by accident.
No.
No, I mean, and that's the thing that has continued to baffle me with increasing levels of alarm over my time working in games, which is just people expect outcomes that are different than the machines they've built.
Yeah.
Live service games that have inherent resource needs and fidelity that means they can only put out an update every 6 months, want to operate at the scale of Fortnite, a game which has been built from the ground up to let them put in
Yeah.
a new musician in a week.
Yeah.
That those things are mutually exclusive. You'll never have a 2-week update cadence from a 6-month inherent development cycle. And you can look at the numbers on a spreadsheet. You can look at the different calendars and see they don't line up. And yet I have found at every level of the industry, whether it's been my time working in indie or AAA or original or licensed, that intentionality usually does not come through. And what is still meticulous planning, because so many people are making graphs and calendars and spreadsheets, just ends up being inaccurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that I hypothesized. When you look at El Paso Elsewhere and then you look at I Am Your Beast, gameplay-wise, these two games look very different. Systems-wise, are you using a lot of the same things? Because I'm like, in theory, if you go from El Paso Elsewhere to I Am Your Beast, there are plenty of similarities, but because of the presentation, they look so different. Is that part of how you're making games so fast? Is that you are effectively, like, using a lot of the same systems, but then totally rebranding them?
That would be really smart.
This is why I'm smoking, because I know the answer is...
I chased that dragon for years. It is my, like, shining tower off in the distance for a while. Earlier in my career, I idolized Ubisoft because I thought that a lot of the ways...
It's 100% their system, yeah.
They utilize studios and systems was that. It's so tough. It's so tough, and you end up burning a lot of time. This is one of the things that meant that I actually started going the opposite direction over the years. When you build a universal system, it takes more time than making the system that builds the game you're trying to build right now. And you usually end up cutting off a bunch of pieces of that system. Like, we had multiplayer support in El Paso Elsewhere for the longest time.
Whoa.
And we just had to rip out that back-end code because it's like, okay, as the game is continuing development, we can keep this in here, but it means that our frame rate is going to be 20 frames per second. Do we want a 60 frame per second action game, or do we want a 20 frame per second thing that can theoretically do multiplayer if we add it later? You pick the first option.
That would be sick.
But that's such a big
though.
part of what you're doing as well, though, is scope management, is knowing when to cut, which I think as an industry we're fucking terrible at, of just going, we don't need this. We don't, like, we're very maximalist. We're very much, let's get the most game we can get made, and let's keep everything we make. And I'm a little guilty of that occasionally. Like, your ability to cut is very impressive to me. It's very inspiring to me.
Thank you. I'd say a lot of it isn't so much cuts as the not putting it in the first place.
Sure.
I've got
cutting at the conceptual stage, I guess. I mean,
yeah. Cutting at conceptual stage, cutting at planning stage, knowing what you want to get out of pre-pro. I look at a lot of friends' pitch decks, and I look at students' pitch decks and other things. And most 1-year games, 2-year games are actually 4-year games, and then they turn out to be 4-year games. I think as an industry, we have done ourselves a disservice not calibrating a language and methodology for understanding how you make a 4-year game from the jump.
Yeah.
At different scales as well, right? That's the other aspect of it. Because
perfect.
A 4-year game for a 5-person team is very different.
Yeah, even between the two of you, the team size could be completely different games.
Well, even between us, but then you take that to your old haunts, right? Santa Monica, what they can do in 4 years, it's a very different. So like, even the difference between us two, where like I'm looking at 20 people, you're looking at, you come up, haven't you? So are you at like 10, 12 now-ish? In terms of your average, I know it varies from project to project.
Average team size is around 15 to 20.
So you've grown bigger than I thought. Yeah, okay. So we're getting closer then, probably, in terms of what we can actually reasonably get done.
So, Mike, why aren't you making more video games?
I have full-timers. that is a distinction between us. Yes, that's the biggest difference between us. So you're yes, which has its own challenges versus opportunities, right? In the same way, like because yeah, your entire staff is part timers, right? They're not.
Yeah. Some
Do you have
people
anyone full time other than you, or
No,
Well,
even
are you even full time? Because don't you also work on other games as well?
I do work on other games still. I do it much less. That is a more
Good.
recent innovation that has come over the years as I look for the best work-life balance possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
you needed to? You definitely had. I remember a few years ago you were doing a lot, like a terrifying amount. So I'm glad about that.
This year, I'm only shipping 3 games under the Strange Scaffold label, so
You got
we're
lazy.
bringing it
You
down.
got lazy. You got lazy.
I feels lazy, but you know, I'm pursuing mindfulness.
I'm sorry. Does that mean you're making 3? You have 3 games coming out this year? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Get out of here. You know what I mean? This fucking guy. So this is my question, and it's gonna sound like a joke, but Mike, I am asking in a way that is my angle is to inform. Why aren't you making 3 games a year?
Why
If
aren't I
you have
making
similar
3
team
games a year?
sizes and you have full-time people, why aren't you
I'm
making
just not
3
very
games
good
a
at the
year?
job. Like I'm lazy. I think it's a different focus. I think we've talked about this kind of privately, but I'm fine with laying it out to our mid-sized audience here.
Absolutely.
I feel like I've gone through periods that are closer to what you're doing in terms of like Subsurface Circular. Those games were like 4 month, 5 month projects.
Subsurface Circular. No.
Subsurface Circular took 4 years. That's how
I'm
you gotta
still
make those robots
astounded.
by hand.
I'm still astounded you only made that in 4 months. I can see all the ways you built it, but it's still one of the most and even Quarantine Circular is still
very
one of the most
efficient.
Yeah, I mean,
intelligent,
Quarantine was
scope-cutting
longer.
games.
Quarantine, I won't pretend was 4 months, but like Solitaire Conspiracy, there's a lot of like managed scale things we've done.
True.
I think what we ended up doing though, in terms of the projects we've pursued, is we've tried to map some of those efficiencies to a bigger project, and that's why something like Tron Catalyst, which people should obviously go and wishlist,
Obviously.
for its time for 20 people over the couple of years we were making it, is much bigger, I think, than people probably realize or would expect, because we've scaled the kinds of efficiencies that you're doing. But it's just a different focus. Like I think as well, one of the things that you've absolutely nailed is, and it's something you referred to earlier in terms of kind of your pipelines and it ties into the aesthetics of your games, is you've found aesthetics that really support fast turnaround. And I say that with massive compliments. Like, you have chosen art styles which specifically you can get done quick. And I think a lot of our games, if you look at them, we've gone down the route of quite relatively more expensive art quality, and in terms of how those processes go, how long it takes me to make a character for Tron versus how long it takes you to make a character for any of your games. There's such a difference between those two numbers that I think that's, to me, it's asset production is very fast for you guys. You're very smart with your scoping on your design stuff. I think we could probably try and remember and learn how to work like that again, but I think we've been going this way for long enough that we would actually stumble and trip up. I think we're kind of generationally further along implies that I think we're getting better or whatever. It's not that. It's just there's an institutional knowledge has a short-term memory problem. Like, you're kind of you move in a direction. I think it would be very hard for us to move all the way back to kind of this kind of approach.
One other thing I think is very interesting about the games you make is, even, say, John Wick Hex is not the most graphically complex game ever.
Fuck you.
But the challenges,
Commercial take.
the challenges you ended up taking on are ones that I look at it and I instantly just, like, the blood runs out of my face. The thing I think about there is you made a game in which your characters can animate and have to link up in so many different ways that all look correct when viewed at multiple angles.
Yeah, and we didn't always succeed.
You mostly succeeded,
yeah.
though, and that alone, like, I look at that and I say, that's a 1 year problem minimum, and y'all made a great game there.
Well, that's where I bet your measurements of time. Sorry if this is all massively indulgent, people watching this, but like, that's where I think I think that's one of the interesting quirks of your process, is because you're working with part-time teams, you're the you can't multi-process quite as easily or well necessarily as a bigger full-time team. So like, yes, that's a 1 year job, but that's a 1 year job for like 3 or 4 people. That's not a 1 year job for the entire team. So like, you can compartmentalize. I get the impression potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, with a team that is working in these bursts that you're working on things, I imagine it's kind of an all hands on deck situation for all problems, or are you able to distribute kind of the big kind of challenges more generally across the team? I feel like a big full-time team kind of absorbs a lot. It feels like it's more absorbent of these kind of bigger problems, whereas I feel like you're probably like dealing with things in more of a sequential, serialized way rather than parallel. Or am I talking nonsense and that's not true at all?
There's a little bit of truth in it. I'd say that we have flow and bottlenecks, and the bottlenecks are hard bottlenecks. So, as opposed to, as you said, being absorbent, where there can be some distributed load, some wiggle room, and some people can do different things. If a development tool is not there, or if a thing breaks down and everyone is part-time, your ability to distribute around that obstacle is way harsher. So a lot of the scope evaluation is also, what is new territory? If someone claims it's not new territory,
very deliberately, aren't you? You're being very careful with that. Yeah.
And that was part of the reason I'm Your Beast got delayed, is because there were a couple things that when I looked at the math, but in a lot of practical terms, the things were not coming together in that time where we would have it bang on, ready, at the date, in a good way with minimal crunch. And I literally looked at the game a couple days before launch, and I was like, oh, so when people flagged that horde mode was taking longer than expected, and I was like, well, there's all these factors for why we should be able to do it. I should have just cut it right then. I should have just cut it right then and said, well, we don't need a horde mode set of levels. We will have variety without it. We'll find a different vector to do it. That's been a big part of growing over the years, and why we were able to make bigger games than we could have at the start, I think, is also learning how to make those calls earlier. I've never cut a feature too fast.
Do either of you, with much smaller teams, like obviously I'm coming from a AAA studio, we would regularly have scope discussions where things would be cut. Like, scoping was regularly talked about even in like a pre-production phase. But then you would notice scope creeping back up again. Is that a AAA problem, or are the two of you also dealing with that of like, wait, we cut these things, but I feel like that comes from you have hundreds of people contributing cool ideas and getting excited, and then it grows again in a different direction?
No, it certainly it happens, and it happens differently on different projects. Like, I'm working right now. Well, we both are on like licensed stuff where there is that kind of you do have like people outside who are like, it'd be really cool if, and you're like, it would be really cool if, let's do that. So there are those places. I think that's one of the things. I mean, that's definitely one of the things in my reputation out there is like the reason we managed, because we're famously able to hit milestones. That's kind of our big thing, and people like us for that. Is we are very aggressive with our scoping. We're known to be very, very careful with scope, and yes, that's often cutting stuff. It's also, as Xalavier said, it's like the easiest thing is just to stop it before it gets into the game at all, or you start on it. But yeah, I literally cut something from the game today. Like, we were looking at one person on the team schedule, and we went, oh, there's a couple of weeks extra work here than we can realistically get done, and you're mapping all of this out on the project, and that thing had to get kind of sliced out, and
so what are you weighing up?
Never notice.
Totally. What are you weighing up when you're making those calls? Like if you're making a call, like you said, with El Paso Elsewhere cutting multiplayer, like how do you do that efficiently? How is there not a ton of deliberation on what you're going to keep and what you're going to cut?
One last factor to actually bring up alongside this is that the gravitational when you're looking at hundreds of people, because I've also been in AAA and you've got way more people. It's a lot easier to cut when you've got just like the faceless mass of the audio team and say, I'm sorry, audio team, you're going to have to go without. No one gets porridge today. audio team is a faceless blob in a lot of respects. The art team, there's a few people who are disappointed, but it can disappear into the mass of people who are making this project, and there's a degree to which it is felt on a team level that the commiseration, but we have to move on, and we're making this massive thing, and that feels really good. When the thing gets smaller, every person's individual gravity and orbit feels much higher. And when you have part-timers, we pay at or above indie rates, but people who are working part-time at Strange Scaffold are doing it because they're either passionate about the projects or about our mission. So it's like people personally invested, not just doing a contract job, choosing to be here, putting in 10 to 15 hours a week or more, or as little as like 2, but like they're deeply embedded, and you're going to look them in the eyes with the rest of the team surrounding you and say, I'm going to cut this thing that you think would be good for the game, or I'm going to push for this thing that maybe you don't think fits the game, but I believe does. And
I'd say that's softened on the full-time thing, which is good, because I think, especially because we have a zero crunch policy, nobody is overworking, nobody is ever going above and beyond in that way. It does mean that we cultivate a healthy distance. We cultivate the understanding on the team that, you know what, some of the work is going to get wasted. It always sucks. Like, people, I'm not going to pretend it's not frustrating to people, but I do think we're able to approach that with a bit less stress, I think, than probably you are able to, which is a nice benefit. But it's ultimately, that's leadership. It's your job as the person who's making those decisions is to make sure the team understands why that's important, why the object you're making in its totality is better off for that, and to build consensus on the team and make sure that people are generally pulling in the same direction. I always go, I probably said this on the show, but like, it's my favorite go-to is there's an episode of Star Trek Next Generation where Picard and I can't remember who the other character is, they're on an away mission, and I think it's Beverly Crusher and Picard are on an away mission, and Beverly turns to Picard and she says, which way should we go? And he's like, oh, we need to head north. And they go north for time lapse and crossfades to imply passage of time, and it's the wrong direction. And she says, why did you think it was this direction? He was like, you asked, so I had to pick one. That's what leadership is. And that's stuck with me so massively, of like, even when you're not completely sure, even when you don't even know if this is the right path, being decisive and clear and consistent does go a long way with those decisions. Hopefully, if something's getting cut, the person whose work it is, and usually, to be clear, we cut before anyone's done the work, that you're always trying to plan out months in advance, but the person whose stuff is being cut is often coming to you and saying, I think we need to cut this, because you've done a good enough job of everyone understanding where this project is and what they're required to do. And that's where it comes down to, I've got amazing producers who work on that stuff. I'm sure you do as well. Like, it's super useful to have, you're trying to build a situation where everyone on the team kind of already knows what we need to do before you even say it. That's the dream, that's the goal.
And you build an environment for that. So to answer your question, Alana, of like what we weigh up, I'm weighing human impact and I'm weighing impact on game vision. And yeah, one of the things that's beautiful is that if you have a studio formed in this way, you can have people bubbling up those things without you having to do it. But also, because people are passionate in games in general, you'll still have people who on their tiny individual level, not to say that they're individual.
Stop referring to them as tiny individuals is my advice.
But on the individual level, they have their own heart scope creep. There's scope creep in their heart. I don't know if you have helpful software that lets you look at your collaborators' screens all hours of the day, Mike. I don't do that, but it could be useful.
What a weird accusation. No, fuck no. I mean, we obviously we do agile sprint planning and stuff, so we are tracking hours spent, but no, I'm not looking at people's screens.
No, but like the joke of like, sometimes you cannot see where someone is increasing scope on their own level or setting up a future dependency. So there's a lot of communication there. I'd say one of the biggest factors of how you cut and figure out what to cut And one of the things I respect most about your work, Mike, all jokes aside, is that you do believe that this is a leadership thing. I've been in a lot of studios and seen and heard of a lot of studios where you have this antagonistic relationship between creative direction and studio direction, and cutting scope that creates an environment where everyone is pushing against a producer who has to be the embattled person who says, how do we make the game come out? And I really respect how you say, like, as a leader, the job isn't just picking direction. The job is saying, hey, putting your hand on someone's shoulder, I want you to have the best work-life balance possible. This is going to conflict against that. Let's talk through how we get you that and also make something you're proud of, because as it is, this either won't happen, which will hurt you more, or if it does happen, it's going to cost too much for you and the project on an existential level.
I think you're right. I think there's a really unhealthy, and I've worked in those environments as well, like an unhealthy split between creative direction and intent and getting shit done. And I think one of the things that unifies a lot of the, especially the indie scale studios with longevity, is that pragmatism of understanding that's the same fucking thing. You know, those things work together, and I've got very good producers, and I make sure that my team knows that my relationship with them is not antagonistic. It's not, I'd love to get this in, I really want this, but my producer won't let me do it. That's never how anything is presented to the team. Sometimes we're having private arguments about whether we can and can't do anything, but in terms of what we present to the team, it's always a unified kind of front, because it's important to me that people do understand that is respected, and ultimately I think this is somewhere where I do differ to a lot of indie studio owners, that I don't consider us artists, I consider us designers. I think we're craftsmen. I think we're making something, we're making a product. We're going to try and instill as much meaning and beauty and art in it as we can, but fundamentally, a game development studio that doesn't ship a game is not a game development studio. So
and you can be an
artist.
artist.
Kind of in front of mind for me. Say again?
I said, and you can be an artist, but if you are, you shouldn't also endanger 20 other people's lives at the same time.
Which is obviously a massive part of both of our mindsets, I'm sure, most of the time, is how is this thing I'm currently posting on Blue Sky going to impact the job security of 20 people? It's 100% a thing.
I've spoken about this before, that one of the things about working in AAA that really surprised me was how much the people mattered. And I know that seems silly, but I really wouldn't have expected it from the outside, if that there were decisions that were made just to make sure that people were happy. Like, if a certain department was sick of doing a particular kind of thing, then potentially you could lose people from that department, because especially in AAA, Sony Santa Monica Studio works on games for a very long time. You would have people who would get bored or feel unfulfilled, and so decisions get made so that you don't lose those people, because losing people and rehiring people is so expensive. And it's something that I just had no concept of from the outside.
Or even just losing a little efficiency, right? Like, and it's again pragmatic, as well as obviously we care about the people who work for us, but also pragmatically you want to get the most work out of them. Like, that is a fact. There is a balancing act there. But happy people do better work more consistently. Like, we 100% shuffle work around, where I've got people, I'm not going to say names on the show, but like, I've got people who work for me who I know, this person doesn't want to work for more than a week on this kind of thing. I want to get them moving around. I've got people who work for me who want to get their head down and do the same area consistently for 2 weeks and just be left alone, basically. And those people, I'll give those things. So yeah, you're always balancing that.
It's like video games are made by people or something. You know what I mean? That's crazy.
It's true. Well, I remember very early episode of this podcast, us talking and us talking about like how games budgets are done. It is, people are the most expensive asset on a project by a million miles. Yeah. So yeah, of course you're going to make sure that people are looked after, and also we're good people who want to treat people well. So it's it works on both angles.
Have either of you taken any kind of leadership training? Because I will say, I feel like it doesn't sound this way, but I will say I feel like the games industry has a big person who has a ton of experience ends up as director problem, even though they have had no leadership training. And that, like, you're good
at programming, we should put you in charge of people.
Yeah, yes. Or even in charge of creative decisions, even if they haven't a creative background. And I have a few friends who were working in a studio but all actually left was AAA, where the stories were very miserable because it was a director who had not previously been a director who was doing the thing where you get caught up in excitement, and they were basically changing what they wanted to do every 2 weeks. They'd be like, I saw this movie, or I played this
Inconsistency
game,
is
and
the
we should
worst.
do this instead. And for the whole team, it was so overwhelming. And it's like, that seems like a thing that's fixed with leadership training. The industry's not, like, that I'm aware of, there aren't really any avenues.
It's
for
not great at it. I mean, I was lucky. I did get quite a lot of it because I did. I got promoted to design lead when I was working, at someone else's studio, and they did. Fair play to them. They did put me into management training, which was super useful. But to be honest, I think it's also just like a personal temperament thing as well. I think there's just people who are better suited and more able to think of themselves in that role.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right, though. We absolutely promote people based on their technical skill or artistic skill, often beyond their capacity to be
a good director,
good collaborators and communicative. We specifically, I mean, we have an absolutely vital no arseholes rule at Bithell Games. We are very, very careful with our hiring. Which is not to say that anyone who's interviewed for me and not got a job is an arsehole. That's not what I'm saying. Sorry, person watching who thinks that. But we're very careful, and we absolutely want to maintain an environment where everyone collaborates and communicates well, because that is the most. It's more important to me that you can communicate the thing you just added to the game than that you can make that thing 20% faster. Like it's so comes down to communication.
Well, same as like.
But I also think you can be intuitively good at it, which Xalavier is like that. If you've not done management training, you are a very good manager of people, right? You've got that skill set just because it's in your temperament to be that guy, right?
I mean, I'd say a lot of it was how my dad impacted me. He's he's in the military, and their entire thing is servant leadership. If you're a leader, you're a servant. You are looking for how to empower people because the job doesn't get done without people. And so coming into, not just because I had occupied leadership positions and had been fortunate to occupy leadership positions creatively and like over people before starting my studio, did I get to see how that works practically and figure out that it did work for my temperament and how I wanted to treat people in the first place. I'd say the other big area, as big if not bigger, was like the keen understanding that when you support people on an individual level, the game individually can become greater than some of its parts. You can have someone become one of my favorite experiences as a journalist was finding out that the Planescape Torment team was built from all of the C and D level people from across the studio. It was the dumping ground. And it was known throughout the studio that it was a dumping ground. And a guy who had never done 3D art before was just interested in doing 3D art. He was a middling 2D artist by the description of the other people on the team. And he did a piece, and it was great with the 3D art tools at the time. And he ended up doing every 3D art piece in the game. And so individual empowerment and individual management and really thinking through the dynamics of how every person on a team, and I'm sure you saw this as well, even at the AAA scale, Alana, how each one of those people can impact the game for good. That's one of the most heartbreaking things about layoffs is if you're a developer, you know that there are shards of thousands of stories of how those people properly empowered, supported, can and did, even on games that were poorly received, make that thing worth playing at all.
Yeah.
And
that's
it's so
just
inefficient.
lost.
I mean, again, I really don't want to come across like I don't care about the human angle on it, but it's even bad from a business point of view. It's so inefficient to build a team that works well together and then get rid of them. It's an absolute
waste of money.
As you said, Lana, to rehire them.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Can I ask you a question, Xalavier, on that particular topic? Because it's something I've never actually remembered to ask you in our conversations, but because of the part-time nature of things, I assume everyone's kind of contractors and kind of coming on project by project. Are you able to do the kind of long-term development stuff, or do you have the same people kind of coming back repeatedly? Are you able to kind of give increasing responsibility to people? Do you find that do you think that people are coming in and growing with you, or is it more that you're getting the best out of them so they can go on to do other things elsewhere? Do you see yourself as kind of an amazing stepping stone on a journey, or are you trying to build those journeys within Strange Scaffold as well?
Both. It's very fluid on purpose. So one of my favorite things about the studio, now that's survived long enough, is we've had people who have had to step away because of other commitments or because something cataclysmic happened in life, a bereavement, and then they just got to step away from the project. And because of the formation of the studio, someone else can support them and or step into that role. It will never be a direct replacement because people aren't cogs, but they can keep the project moving forward. And this ended up happening on El Paso elsewhere. Someone had to step away, and it was for a key department. We ended up finding someone great to step in and support on that role. And then that person came back. And they were like, hey, if there is any more work available on this or a future project, I did enjoy working here and I'd be open. And it was like, hey, you know what? According to our dev timeline, you can actually do half of the remaining work and it will make this game way more shippable in the process. We're so glad you're here again. So
it's fluid, but you are getting that kind of recurrent kind of growing those people through the project and projects. Are you having people kind of working across multiple? I know you are because I know some of the people who work with you, but like you are pulling people across from project to project to project, right?
Sometimes multiple projects, and sometimes it is, as you said, growing internally, but a lot of it is also I'm looking for and passing on jobs to people all the time. There's a lot of, that part of running a studio is the work outside of work. So a lot of it is also looking for how can I support the people who I've been fortunate to collaborate with to do their own things.
Alumni, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like, hey, there's a publishing opportunity or a funding thing, and I know someone wants to start their own studio. I pass that stuff along, even if it would be in competition with Strange Scaffold, because if all boats are lifted, then we all get to survive.
Directly related question. How... So if you have 15 to 20 people, what does the ebb and flow of that actually look like? Like, how often are you putting people straight into production on the next thing? How do you decide who comes and stays? Like, this is a problem that I think I've spoken about on the show before that was also a much bigger problem in AAA than I realized that I'm surprised more journalists haven't reported on, is how the culture surrounding a project ending is very toxic for contractors. Like, you are watching people in real time, kind of, in some cases from some of the stories I've heard, like sabotage each other in order to try and stay employed, take credit for other people's work. Like, people are doing stuff like that to try to be the one who stays on. And this is this whole world that I just did not know about that is really toxic for game development. So how are you, like, if you're having that many games come out, how do you decide who to keep on, how many people to keep on? Like, how do you think about the size of the studio? Like, I don't know how better to phrase that. Hopefully my question made sense.
Oh, it was a great question. I think that the way I think about the size of the studio is really project dependent, and this is one benefit of being an explicitly auteur studio. I don't know if you benefit from this as well, Mike, but just the idea of the next game is coming from my head. We have the people who are going to be working on the next game to fulfill that vision. If it works with your skill set or whatever else, and it's someone that me and my production team have identified we want to bring on, cool. If not, the structure of Strange Scaffold, and this is where we get into a more individual Strange Scaffold thing, is just, I want it to be explicitly fluid. I want to make the type of game where someone could do one meaningful contribution and dip, and to have a precise enough scoping of the game that, like, we could confidently ask an animator to do this amount of work. It would be most, if not all, of the work needed, and then they're done. Part of this came from my experience being a writer in different games and different scales, also AAA, and saying, you know what? If someone's trying to get 40 hours of work out of me all the time in this role, it really doesn't make sense. I'm spinning wheels, I'm creating dependencies. I just don't need to be writing right now. The game isn't in a place for it. Having a studio that also is like, hey, you'll be working at this stage and at this stage, and in the middle, partially because you're part-time, you be free. And if you aren't available later on because something has changed, we will pivot around that. Creating a studio to be fluid and to be very vision-led has provided that. And because it's an auteur studio, there's less hurt feelings around, like, Xalavier's doing a crazy thing next. there's no way of knowing what he would have done next. I'm just working on this project now, or excited for the next time the opportunity comes around.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. 'Cause we're very different. We're more of a reservatory. It's actually kind of a weird event when someone leaves Bithell Games. Like, because genuinely, most people just stick around.
Part of your whole thing, Mike, like
Yeah.
from talking to you about this over several years, is like you have a real my full-time stuff here focus, right? Like, am I representing you correctly?
Totally.
Yeah, but that like. So then
You build
I
your
like
game.
them. I'd never admit to it, but I like having them around. I would never tell them. I don't want them to get big-headed.
So
But yeah,
how
I think
do you manage
Go on.
that then of like between projects, how you allocate people's time?
it's kind of it's the same thought process, but kind of from the opposite direction, I guess, to what you just described, Xalavier. Where for me, it's I look at the team I have and I go, okay, what's the skill set here? What can they do? What are they interested in? What gifts? What interesting games and gifts are they sharing in our random Slack channel? Where's the interest going? Where's the excitement? Where are people? And that kind of, to me, I feed off of that in terms of what I want to do next. In terms of it is, I would never describe myself as an auteur personally, but like I definitely am the person who decides what we make ultimately. But weirdly, it's very reactive to the people around me. There's a massive like narrative theme to Tron Catalyst that came up from a conversation I was in the room for. We were getting ready for a call, and two people on the team were talking about something that they were experiencing in their personal lives and just having a chat. And that became like the core of what the narrative of Tron Catalyst is about, and that was really inspiring to me, with their permission, to be very clear.
Let me monetize your trauma.
I feed off of where the team's going, and like when we're talking about like what we're making next, there's stuff where it's like, oh, there's this really interesting art test someone on the team is playing with, and there's this really interesting thing. So it's kind of reactive in that way. And then the other thing that really jumps to mind from what you were just saying is we also make things that can feed the team throughout production. We don't have those lulls you're describing. Those roles that would normally, and you're absolutely right, would normally have kind of a gap where, well, we don't need anything in that kind of area for this part of development. We are either those jobs are things that are done by multi-skilled people who can switch tasks. So we have like someone on our team who's a really good level designer, but also a fantastically experienced QA person. So she'll jump between those roles as we have a deficit in either direction. A need in either direction. Or they'll be done by me. So things like writing, because I write all of our games. Yeah, I can do the writing bit, and then I lose the writing job for 6 months because I'm doing something else, right? So we lean on the multi-talented nature of the people who work here. And then we also, and this is where Subsurface Circular is a brilliant example of this, is we'll also try and work out where's the value in using someone we really don't need. So like with Subsurface Circular, a lot of the production value in that game comes from the fact that we had a really good artist and we didn't really have anything else for him to be doing, so we could spend time making that robot look really good and this bit look really good. And we're doing it right now on Tron. There's some people on the art team where we don't have traditional jobs for those artists, but we're able to put those artists onto doing a weird aspect of the game that is just a lovely bit of polish that we can throw over here. So we come at the same kind of problem and those ebbs and flows of workloads, but we create work where that's necessary, which is another reason where we're probably not so well suited anymore to doing the kind of the 4-month, 6-month project, because now we have all of those people to be thinking about in the context of every job. Coming up with what do 20 people do to make something we can ship in 6 months is a much harder problem than let's make something in 6 months. Who do we need? That's a much better approach to making a quick game, which is why that's another reason where it's the classic thing. Our boat's a bit too big to turn as fast as it used to be able to, right? It's kind of, we've outgrown that, which is interesting. It's interesting kind of hearing how that's going for you now. And you're making use of all these awesome new tools and processes, and it's great.
Yeah, we've had people teach each other inside the studio things to do, but what I love about everything you were saying is just how intentional it is, right? Like, I think
has to be
a problem for the games industry as a whole is how much of a lack of intentionality and accountability there is. And what you're describing is a game design problem. We've approached that game design problem in two different ways of, as a director, as a studio head with your production team, you are doing the game design for how all these people can have interesting, cool things to do to advance the studio and serve players all the time. And I'm saying like, hey, what's the way we can stay as small and nimble as possible all the time so we can make a game like Click Holding, get it out the door, and make the next thing and survive regardless of the commercial success of the last thing. And the intentionality with which you approach that process and the people around you, it's something I've always really respected about your work. And it's something that I think there's a lot of people who try to copy.
For the audience. We compliment each other too much on this call. You know who I respect? Alana Pierce. She's doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
I love Alana Pierce's work, and you're one of the few people in games who terrifies me with how much you get done all the time, including this podcast.
I literally asked you to be on this podcast so you could explain how you make so many games. What are you talking about?
Yeah, so it's telling.
Maybe
that
we're all just looking at each other and going, how are
you're
doing any of this?
Xalavier is a very generous person. I was last year. Do you remember this, Xalavier? You met my wife for the first time at DICE, and he talked to her for like 3 or 4 minutes about how wonderfully impressed with me he was.
Just a nice guy.
He walked away, and she was like, "I think he might like you a bit more than I
do." That's amazing. Well, can I throw you both a question though? Like, just on the topic of this. You each have 12 months to make a game. It has to be out on the 31st of January, 2026. What is the first thing that you do? Like, where do you start? Do you start with broad creative concept? Do you start with team? Do you start by thinking, okay, what can we take from a previous project to make this easier? Like, what is the first step for you to make a game in 12 months?
You go first, Salva. You're our guest.
Okay. So if I'm making a game in 12 months, one of the things, again, just previous thread, Mike is looking at his team, what they can do, how they can do it, game designing that problem, and working with them to solve it. That's really cool. Boom. I answered your part of the question, Mike.
That is my answer, so we've saved some time there. Go for it.
But for me...
he's already optimizing the fucking podcast's process. I'm unnecessary.
Lord knows we needed that, to be honest. We could use more of that, yeah.
It's the right
you
energy
get Austin in here. We are not efficient.
Do you like Jerry Goldsmith at all, Xalavier? How do you feel about Jerry Goldsmith?
We haven't even had a
Jerry Goldsmith is a composer, right?
Composer.
Yeah, for film, right?
It's all good.
Yeah. He's a composer for film, right?
Question. You're actually answering it for me, but what's your answer to Alana's question?
Okay. Yeah. So comparing and contrasting. Love the intentionality of supporting your values and having that emphasized to your processes. A lot of games doesn't do it. It's why a lot of things in games are on fire. For me, if I'm looking at minimum of human damage, maximum of player impact, that first probably like month or two, I am hardcore looking at the timeline of the game, the budget that we have, and saying, when we start production, what does this thing need to be? And I'm not beginning production with anyone else in the room outside of myself and maybe a couple of other people until I know what the game looks like from beginning to end and can hold it in my head. So our 12-month timeline is actually an 8-month timeline with up to 4 months of pre-planning in excruciating detail, including for the people who we would work with on that game, saying, hey, so here's what I'm thinking for this, but I'm not a systems engineer. Is this actually feasible in this time? And sanity checking with them, figuring out what they're excited about. If they're like, we could do that, but I'd have to do really boring coding for like 6 months. I'm looking for what's a more interesting permutation of that for you. And by the time we begin production, that game ends up looking a lot like the GDD, pivoting as development continues, of course, but like always saying, okay, we literally had this on Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 like a month or two ago, where...
Not a bad title. Not a bad title. I think we can all agree.
So fast, and I was like, that can't be real.
Oh, God. Yeah, Metroidvania
you
coming out in a few months.
Seem like they would be jokes in the background of like a movie or a TV show.
That's... Sometimes that gets to me existentially.
What's the full title of the airport game?
An airport for aliens currently run by dogs.
Love it. Incredible.
I didn't understand why people thought that name was too long until I nearly broke a console back end putting it in.
I was going to say, like, Steam's not going to let you put that title. I mean, they did, but yes, which you'll tell me after which console it nearly broke. 'Cause it's, some of those consoles are hanging by a fucking thread at any given moment. Bless them. I won't say which ones are there, but you can tell me later.
Yes, but yeah, when I know what the game looks like from beginning to end and have that plan and that idea and that like vision for it. In Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3's case, we had a stellar playtest, but people didn't have a mental framework for what they were playing because the game didn't give it to them. And so we literally set up a meeting on Monday and said we have until Tuesday to solve it. This is the version of the game that if we can't come up with anything better by Tuesday, we're going to continue forward with because we have to launch by, spring 2024. And if we do, it has to fit something we can build in our remaining timeline. And given those constraints, the artists in the room had really good conversations and ideas, and we ended up pivoting from making a match 3 survival horror comedy RPG to wrapping that in the structure of a Metroidvania. So we have a Metroidvania now that is a far more cohesive experience.
We got to put a stop on this.
All of the ingredients we had before.
And you said you were neurodivergent, Simon. Is that right?
No, I'm so normal. But yeah, we build around the problem space. It's a creative constraint, and we know what game we're making until we figure out what game we're making again in the time we have left.
It's just...
And functionally, that's exactly the same answer from me. Like, the only difference between our answers is my room starts with 20 people in it, and we talk it through from moment one. I think the other thing for me is I'm a little bit less, and it's probably to my detriment, I'm a little bit less focused on the let's make all our decisions nice and early thing. I'm much more let's get something on its feet, which is just a taste thing and also potentially an experience thing. Maybe just I've just been around a little bit longer and I feel comfortable getting something started because I know the first 10 things I could trip over, so we'll avoid those kind of automatically and kind of get to the next stage. But other than that, it's exactly the same thing. It's you're working out the problem. You've got a resource, which is the people, and you've got the goals that you're trying to achieve, and you're just kind of working out how to map all of that. And the big thing that I think Xalavier is spot on about is getting those people to help with the decision. Even if you're an auto studio, even if you're going to stick your name on the fucking company, what you have knowing to ask, what a piece of shit I am. It's true. But like, going to the people and finding out like how long is it going to take and whether it's even possible and making sure that those people are involved. And I mean, it's comedic at my studio. Like I'll not go into a room with our publisher and say something's possible until I've spoken to my producer, any particular people who might be working on it. Like, and that's unfortunately not the norm. Like most studios are run and are done in such a way where the bosses say what needs to be done and then it's everyone else's job to work out how to get that actually achieved. I think from listening to you talk there, Xalavier, it sounds like me and you are both in that same mold of, no, it's my responsibility not to make an unreasonable request. And then the rest will flow from there, and I think that's one of the reasons we're able to do the things we do, I think.
I don't know how to talk about it without getting too close to NDA, but man, is my pre-production experience.
See the headline forming already above your head.
I started swearing whenever I say anything I'm worried about, so I go, fuck shit, man, is my fucking shit, dick. Experience, fuck you, fuck, with pre-production, fucker. Very different. Like, I wish I could... You shouldn't
call Corey pre-production fucker. It's not fair.
But it's just so different when you work at a studio like SMS. I would actually think any AAA studio, because the systems that are already there are so expensive and you have to lean on the experience of the team, that a lot of your pre-production, there aren't as many questions. There's a lot of, well, this, because it's the way you've done things, you know what I mean? Like, that's not to say there isn't constant innovation and creativity, but it's not a blank canvas.
But there are and that's the other thing, is there's shorthands, and that's one of the things that I love about having, many things I love about having a kind of a recurrent, solid, stable team. That, yes, you're sitting around, you're going, well, we didn't pull that specific thing. We didn't quite get that right on John Wick, did we? Yeah, but we managed it on Tron. Yeah, but that was because of, like, you can kind of, you're, not only is every individual knowledgeable enough to kind of be solving those problems, you're also, as a group, you have that shared history and that knowledge of what you can do together. And I'll get that guy to help me because he helped me on that last thing, and that will work there. And, you know, and you have that kind of, those shortcuts are really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
It's super supportive.
Xalavier, do you have a hot
and
out?
offset some of the risk.
No.
We can keep you for another 5 minutes.
Sure.
Let's do it.
I was gonna ask, like, on top.
You got to intro the show, so.
Hey everyone, welcome to Play Watch Listen. I don't even really do that anymore. We just outro it at this point.
No, it's kind of done now.
Don't worry.
Or
about
you'll
play
stick it.
out.
I've noticed you stick it on the start, like the YouTube.
That's
video.
exactly
You're like,
what
yeah,
I
there's
did.
these guys.
I
We have a
did
conversation.
it at the start so that I have an excuse for it. We clearly don't do any pre-production on the show, everybody. As Mike has said before, Play Watch Listen is a 2-hour conversation in which we record the chunk in the middle. That's literally what it is. Now I've forgotten what my question was. Oh, okay. So, how often are you being presented with ideas from a department that I'm presuming that there are people on your team who will always know more about something than you do, right? Like, that's the process of working on games. Is there are people who are experts on something. You just have to trust that they're the expert on the thing. They have the experience you don't have, even though you're the game director. How often is somebody presenting you with something and you don't have any idea of the scope of that thing? Like, is that a producer's job to then go, well, I don't have the knowledge to say that that's going to take a year or 6 months or whatever? Like, I guess my actual question is how as a director do you approach your lack of understanding for certain disciplines?
A lot of research. This is something that I started practicing back when I was only doing freelance things. Was I wanted to learn the vocabulary of everyone in the room and how they were making decisions and where their evaluation of scope was coming from. So a lot of research, a lot of discussions. Sometimes I'll have chats. If a department tells me something, sometimes I'll have a chat with someone else who is also an expert in that thing to say, hey, does this pass a sniff test? But this is also where working on enough games, and this is a detriment of the modern games industry, is how slowly we build things. Is when you work on enough games, you learn in detail, even just ambiently. Man, here's what a dynamic music system costs you.
You've run that loop enough times that you just...
Procedural generation, all of these key features that if someone comes forward with an idea of how to do it, I am listening to experts and I'm always asking them questions and talking to them. But we've also, especially since we can often run and work with the same people, I can say, you said that the last 3 times.
Yeah.
And with this version of the feature, we ran into these issues. This extrapolated version of the feature will not get inherently faster. There's no way that ends up functioning. So a lot of it is aggressively reveling in the experience of everyone in the room having shipped more games together and apart, and taking those knowledge bases and people in the room saying, I never want to animate a thing like this again, because 6 months from now, it's going to explode, and we're going to have a 3-month period of just fixing that. And I'm like, you've saved us tens of thousands of dollars. Thank you.
The reason I asked that question is because, sorry, Mac, I'll throw to you in a second, but the reason I asked is because even in AAA, I've routinely heard people say, we just didn't know it would take that long. And I was at a point where I was like, how do you work in AAA game dev and not have an understanding?
Someone did.
That's kind of what my thought is. It's
Someone did.
Someone had to have known. Some expert
Someone
knew
probably
and wasn't
said
to,
something.
right?
As
That's
well.
what I'm saying. That's exactly
That's
what my logic is.
100% it.
Someone
No,
knew.
all I was going to say was, I think as well, another part of this which plays into it is estimation as a skill, and developing that is something you can really train yourself in. If I say to you, Alana, how much do you think you pay for groceries every year? You would have a hard time arriving at that number. If I asked you, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? But if I asked you, but every time you go to the shop, how much roughly do you spend? How often do you go to the shop? I could very quickly arrive at a number that would be statistically correct. It would be like within 10% of the right number. Because actually, if you break things down, and you can actually estimate things very easily. And there's a skill you can train. And even if you don't have technical capacity, I don't know how much you spend at the grocery store, but if I know to come to you and ask how much you spend every day, and how many days are there in a year, I know that bit, and I can kind of work my way into it. And I think that's a skill that really works in tandem with the asking people questions. Is just being very good at estimation, and that is something that's a skill you can train, and you can get scarily good at working out things. You're not going to measure how many meters it is from here to there, but if you've got a good sense of it, and if you have to do it every day, a builder can look at a room and go, it's about 20 feet by 15 feet.
True.
And you can learn the same thing, and you don't need to be an expert. You can just, as Xalavier says, like, work around experts enough that you don't need to be right, you need to be nearly right in a statistically and up and down, and always assume you're always underestimating. Get it roughly right, and then 20% is most of the job.
Corey always had a thing that I think about all the time that I like passed on to Layers Deep now that I'm working on that game, where he would be like, whatever length of time you think the game is, add 20%. Like, I don't remember if it was that exactly, but it was like, if you aim for 30,
is a great number.
It's gonna be 40. Like, he was like very like it will always end up being bigger than you think.
Contingency on budget, on time, always add 20% is just a very solid rule to live by. I remember getting told off. I was gonna do a first party game actually with one of the platform holders. And I gave them my budget, and they were like, "You didn't add your 20% contingency to this, did you?" I was like, "You're meant to put a 20% contingency on things." So that was very early in my career.
That's amazing.
Like, yeah, there's a. I think where a lot of the time it goes wrong is people don't anticipate the possibility that they could be wrong.
Yeah.
I think if you go in with the assumption of I'm going to do my best, but I'll definitely be wrong hopefully not most of the time, but enough of the 20% of the time. If you go in with that assumption, that humility, you can kind of protect yourself against the worst of it. You'll still fuck up.
I feel like Corey's thing was,
I
will be wrong, which I always found to be really interesting. He was like, I am 100% going to be wrong about this amount of stuff. Like, it was never a, like, maybe.
It's a weird part of the job. I don't know, Xalavier, if this gels with you as well, but, like, you kind of have to be consistently, directly wrong as little as possible. Like, you have to be a consistent voice with a consistent drive, kind of pointing in a direction, making decisions, but make sure your team understands that you're going to be wrong and that you welcome their criticism of wherever you're saying we should go. And it's such a balancing act of kind of, because nobody wants a director to walk into the room and go, so, what do you guys think we should do? Like, that's not gonna that's gonna scare people very quickly.
Yeah.
But also, you don't want the person who comes in and goes, "I got this sorted. I know exactly what it is, and that's the way we're going. I'm not interested in conversation." You've got to find that balance. And I feel like the difference between most successful directors who've actually successfully shipped stuff is only a wobble of about 10% on that gradient. Yeah. Like, it's where there's definitely like a sweet spot you want to be at as a director, and then you're making tiny changes, and the tiny change there is the difference between a Mike Bithell, a Xalavier Nelson, whatever director. Like, it's all, we're all doing basically the same thing, I guess is my point, ultimately.
Yeah, I think a big root of that is communication. It's one of the things I respect most about Alana. It's one of the things I respect most about you, about directors, and
which of you would you say was better, though? If you had
Alana.
to choose one or the other?
Alana.
Probably Alana. Yeah, it's fair.
But the idea that, like, one of the big things that I started the studio off with, and I think it's part of the reason we've lasted as long as we have outside of the grace of God, is that when I make decisions, I intentionally verbalize all of the components of why I'm making that decision on a team level, so that someone can say, all of this is true except for this bit, and because you've said this bit, I can identify the problem and resolve that before we even begin production. Mm-hmm. And, like, really,
I bet you acknowledge when you're wrong as well. If you fuck something up, I'm sure you're in front of the team saying, I misjudged that. And again, it goes a long way. Like, a lot of bad leaders don't. They can't acknowledge them.
I misjudged that because X, Y, Z.
Yeah,
And
sure.
someone can tell me you also fucked up on Z subsection C.
I've gotten it down to a point now where I'll be like, I fucked up on this because of this, this, and this. And it was Bob over there that told me that was going to go. Bob, by the way, is the team member we blame all problems on. If anything goes wrong in the game, it's Bob's fault. But like, I can point to, like, you tried to stop me from that decision, and I disagreed with you, and we went forward, and I just want to acknowledge that. Like, that's the level I want to take it to. Is the accountability, but also acknowledging, like, the person in the room who was saying, because that makes that person understand that their opinion was listened to, at least, even if it was ignored. But also that, again, sets a precedent for the rest of the team to know that, oh, I should probably say the thing out loud because...
True.
You know,
I'm sure I've said this before,
but
it also didn't occur to me until I worked in AAA, like, how... when games get delayed or things go wrong or things get bloated, it's not because of people not being able to do their jobs. It's because of communication. There's like what really makes a game
you're
delay.
Not in the room if you can't do the job. You're not in the game studio if you're an idiot. It's too competitive.
Totally, yeah. They'll get rid of you in a heartbeat. It's like delays don't happen because some system was just too hard for that dev team. I would think vast majority of the time delays happen because there was a communication problem about that system or because there was some bottleneck regarding that system. Like, it's so much. Are you
saying that problems in society are largely systemic, Alana? And that we should ultimately look at the problems behind the
Let's
problem
not get radical,
individuals.
all right?
I'm just saying.
you might be onto something there, but it's just,
I think I might be.
So much of it is about communication going wrong or like departments miscommunicating. And in some cases, like the single most frustrating experience that I had working at SMS, which I think I might have ranted to you about, Mike, was just one communication thing where like something I needed to know wasn't communicated with me, and it's a process of like figuring out how that miscommunication even happened, of being like, wait, why did I write this whole thing when this isn't a thing? And it's like, it's just such a, like, when you, especially I feel like when your team's that big, I don't even know how you would ever do it totally concisely. And that's why these games are so big and take so long to make. Like, surely communication is easier when you have a much smaller team and you can feasibly have everyone in a meeting at the same time, right?
I mean,
it's exponential.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, 10 people, it's amazing. Then anyone on top of that, it gets worse and worse, and more and more difficult, shall we say, but an exponential square. So like it is that, the adding a 20th person when you've got 19 is hard. I've heard it rounds off again at around 30, but I have no intention of ever getting there, so I'll never know.
Was an Arkham Asylum a team of 30?
Yeah, but that was a once-in-a-generation genius.
Isn't that crazy?
That's not fair. We can't hold ourselves to that standard.
Arkham Asylum was 30 people?
There's no
pretty
way
sure. Let me have a look.
It probably was one of those ones where it was 30 people in the office and then like 200 outsourcers somewhere making the assets. Just in terms of the budget on that game.
At the time, it probably wasn't 200 outsourcers. It was probably something more like 50, but like it couldn't have been this 30.
But yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah. It started as a 40-person team and did end up, it sounds like, with outsourcing
4,000 by the end.
To about 60.
Arkham
Asylum,
very impressive.
Isn't that crazy?
But that's a very concise game.
Yeah, totally.
First Arkham is very concise.
It's my favorite
really
for that reason.
made.
I love how concise it is. Like that game rules.
It's really focused.
And one thing, because we've been talking a lot about cautionary tales of getting into different things or making different decisions as directors and creatives, one thing I want to address really quickly is how much that then gives you permission to do wild things. I don't know if you've experienced this, Alana or Mike, but like when you have an environment where people are communicating in that way, people can come to me with something that sounds wild, but they're like, I have this idea. It fits the vision of the game that you've described for these reasons because you've told me, and we can make it in this time for these reasons. That's why I'm Your Beast has a scoring system it does. Dan Pierce came forward, and I had shot down.
I hate him.
So good.
Talentless.
He's a once in a generation talent. Dan comes forward, and I'd shot down the scoring system for the timing. I was like, every other game in this genre, here is the precedent. Let's not solve a new problem here that we didn't anticipate already, especially since this game is running into some timing jams here, and he just broke down for me. Here's the scoring system. Here's why I believe in it, and here's why I can build it without adding additional overhead for the team. And I looked at that breakdown, and I was like, that's a pivot we can take, and at worst, we can take it out after Steam Next Fest. And the game blew up because of it. And as a director, the permission I have to go to the team and do the crazy thing where it's like, I played a game. Here's the 8 things. Here's a thing I observed in it that may be helpful. Here's 8 reasons why I think it may be possible if this is something we want to do. And then people will, rather than saying, gosh, I hate this guy, he's always coming in with new ideas, is like, people talk about me as if I don't add anything new to the vision of the game because it was always that way. But it's just because I introduce it and communicate it as satisfying our limitations and being a part of the thing that we're doing in the first place.
It's rooted in that pragmatism, and you've built the machine, and the machine is moving forward, and I often use curling as a metaphor, right? That thing's going to keep moving, and you're just there in front of it with the brush, trying to optimize how far it can go. What was I going to say? I think my prediction for you is, my prediction for you in the next 5 years, just to tell you where I think your career's going. I think
doing this unsolicited is bold.
In public, I'm so excited.
Xalavier, I do this. This is my whole thing. I think you're building a machine that's so good. I think you're going to work out a way to have other people drive the train. I think you're gonna have other directors fulfilling their visions of Scaffold, which is the position I kind of found myself in a few years ago, and I think you're going to get there as well, because I think your machine is arguably potentially even better than mine. So I think your process is scalable to other directors, is my point. And I see that in your future.
I can tell you that's already happening now. So
That's
a big
awesome.
part of the reason
So there you are.
that Strange Scaffold is able to do the things we do and the size of the games we do is because at this point, I'm still the originator of a lot of ideas. I still play this lead, creative, and studio head design.
Podcasts.
I do podcasts. I still play the lead and creative on these games and have final say. But on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown, Tom Veneta has been...
Just fucking call a game with 2 words at the
Can't do
title.
it.
Sunshine Shuffle, click holding.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comes with 4 words already.
You don't need to add 2
Your
more.
job is to not go crazy.
But yeah, like
That's got a different director, you're saying, yeah.
Tom Veneta is he's working alongside me, but like the crunchy tactical design of that game, like I handled story, I handled a bunch of other things, but I was like, I cannot learn this genre to the degree to be able to make this satisfying in the time that we have. You are empowered.
I think you're going to pull back even further. I think it's going to be interesting.
I'm your beast.
the
Dan
dream.
Pierce took it.
Like, what I'm saying is, like, to be in a position where you have created something that you enjoy making, that you then have the ability to enable other people to create things. Literally, what more could you want as a creative? That is surely the dream. It's like, now I have all these things, and you can also do this thing with your creative idea. Like, it's
self-fulfilling though. It's so cool because it becomes this virtuous cycle. We have, like, Nick Tringali, who I work with, they're onto their second game now, just announced Amberspire, like that's going really well with them. And now I have other people on my team who are like, Mike, could I maybe direct a game at some point? It's like, maybe you could. Let's work that through, and you can kind of work out those career paths through, and you can do really interesting things. So it's really exciting. I think that's going to become more and more of what you're doing. So I think your stuff is so it's such a nice machine, and I think you're going to be able to empower more people with it. So I'm excited for that.
so cool.
Thank you. Dan Pierce is a huge driver for Iron Beast.
Don't empower Dan Pierce. He's a bad guy. He's a bad guy, and he's going to do you wrong.
Lovely, smart man, and like over time, yeah, like I have been able to benefit. To your point, I remember a conversation we had years ago where I was like, I will never step back from writing my games. Now that people write on my games, I do a lot of editing. I still get to do a lot of fun writing, but like people in a machine that is running well, people being the degree of safety you feel as someone who wants to keep to limitations and express precise visions, to give that to people and allow their creativity to flourish within that environment, it's exponential, and it's something that I never could have imagined 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So
That's
you're
success,
probably
dude.
right.
That's fucking awesome. Like, congrats. That's like, I think that is more of a sign of success than how much money you make. It's that you got to a position where you
Money would be nice too.
all right, money
We can
bags.
achieve both.
Okay.
Let's try.
Always
Let's fucking try.
Pro-capitalism.
Money
Mike
bags.
Bithell over here always talking about.
I just
how
think
can we make more money?
capitalism works. It's a good system. We can all rely.
Thomas was alone because he was
nothing wrong
floating
with
in a
it.
pile of money.
Thomas was alone because who needs friends when you got money's out of it?
Yeah,
That's
that's
Absolutely.
fucking-
That's
so
the Mike Bithell
really-
view. Yeah.
they're really doing. Their self-esteem's clearly great.
Yeah, no, Elon seems to be doing
Yeah,
great.
he does.
Seems like a really
And he's
happy
not
guy.
worried what
He's
anyone
having-
thinks
he's
of him.
chill.
He's not.
No, he just lives a very chill life.
And he's the
yeah, no, he's
number
cool.
one ranked Path of Exile player.
And it was all
That's
him.
very important to him.
And he heard all of it himself. Yeah, it's really just a cool guy, I think. Yeah.
My final
job.
question was gonna be, in the simplest terms possible, like to somebody who, like, we've used some game dev jargon here. Mike said sprint, and I was like, can we unpack a sprint? But that's a separate podcast. We can talk about
That's too.
sprints.
We don't got time.
And I'll
That's an
have
episode.
the haunting memories of fucking sprints. We can go over it some other time.
We need to talk about how waterfall is actually good for game development. That will be next time I'm
Fuck
on.
you.
Yeah,
You're a
yeah,
man
I
out of
believe in
time.
it.
Stop it. No.
Yes.
Stop it. Go away.
How
Unacceptable.
the question
Not
is,
my podcast.
how do you what advice do you
It's
have?
Alana's podcast. Let's not even pretend.
It's a lot of this podcast. You're absolutely
Different
right.
episodes that I haven't been on. Again, the creative dream. Mike and Austin
Because
just
they
run
weren't
it
good,
themselves.
Build the
though.
machine. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, almost every time you guys like forgot
You've
to record
empowered
video
other
or some
people
shit.
on.
I'm so down with Austin doing the podcast that we spoke about last time, where he just interviews people
You
about their
need to
random
just
jobs.
get him to do that show.
I'm
You
so
should just
down to
do it
publish
and get
that.
him to- You should publish that show.
That would be
That's
that would be
100% a good
awesome
show.
and is like totally up their alley. Anyway, sorry. The question is, what is the number one piece of advice that you would have to someone starting a game studio who wants to make games efficiently? Literally, what is the tip without the jargon? What is the driving force between a specific vision executed on time?
I think the driving force for a specific vision executed on time is a minimum of unanswered questions. The earlier you are in your career, the harder it is to know what questions you need to answer ahead of time. But when you are making a game, if what you can do is, in a way that makes sense for your time and budget, answer as many questions as humanly possible before you even start, then you are on track to ship that game on time and have it be a high quality, interesting thing.
It's a very good answer.
My advice is, if it's your first game, you will not ship it on time, and that's okay.
That's why you need to make it shorter. Don't pitch.
Make it shorter, sure, but yeah.
Yeah,
Go on.
Yeah, don't pitch addendum to what I just said. That's why you don't pitch a 3-year game as your first thing.
Yeah.
Even if you get funding for
You
it.
see it all the time, though. I get so many. Oh my goodness.
I told Mike that I
We'll
had.
talk.
I
Are
had
you
my-
at Dice? We'll talk at Dice. We'll gossip at Dice.
I'll be at
We'll gossip for
GDC.
you.
We'll gossip
Oh,
there.
I'm not at GDC, unfortunately. We'll figure it out. We'll find an opportunity.
this to me?
I
But
told
yeah,
Mike
like-
we could just get together on a Zoom call. You doesn't have to be in person. That's gross. I told Mike that I had when I joined Layers Deep and I'm now, narrative director on an indie game. I had my required call with Rami, where I
Yep.
set up a call and I chatted to Rami.
You've
Gotta
got
do
to.
it.
He's the gatekeeper. He's the guy stood by the gate. To
Yeah.
indie. You have to go
And
and
he
have a conversation
he said
with him.
welcome. He was like, I'm so
So
excited
welcome,
to have you on
come
this
into
side.
the indie scene.
Yeah.
Come on, you're welcome.
But as I had that meeting with him, we were having conversations about game length, and the answer Rami gave me is one that's very obvious and makes a lot of sense. Like, I was like, how long should the game be? What should we be looking for when talking to publishers about like an amount of time to give them? And he was like, no, figure out the game you want to make and then figure out how long that is. And if it ends up being too long, that would be the period where you would cut. But don't make a game to fit in a 10-hour chunk. Make the exact thing you want to make. There's only 3 of us. Like, we're in such a cool
See how
position, we can be
how
super
long
creative.
it's fun for,
Yeah.
right?
Like,
Yeah.
what is the game that you
Yeah.
really want to make? If that's 5 hours, great. If it's 20 hours, great. But what is exactly the thing you want, and then figure it out from there. And I was like, you know what? That
Me
actually
and
makes a lot more
Xalavier
sense.
are here to say it should be 3 fucking hours.
I love
Don't
short
fucking
game. I love short.
Keep it
game.
short. Keep it quick.
I'm team short game
Rectangles,
these
the whole thing.
days. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, Anytime that I hear that something's 20 hours now, I go, oh. But Austin actually, a game came out. It's like Eternal Strands. Austin was the composer in a game called Eternal Strands that just came
Yellow
out.
Brick Games.
Yeah. Mike Laidlaw is the director. It just came out. Well, it will be last week by the time of publishing, but I am planning to play this one all week next week. It looks.
I'm just glad to see
absolutely rad.
the Strand genre really kind of coming into its own now. It's very
We
exciting.
called it. We knew it was, Hideo Kojima.
I
Artist
made the
Studio.
first Strand like.
You did make the first Strand.
What? Huh? How?
It was called Witch Strandings. I realized I played Death Stranding. I was like, oh shit, he did create a genre. They made basically a 2D demake, Ghibli-inspired, core-lined. You
No way.
free a forest from Witch's influence.
That's
So
incredible.
I was the first one through the door.
How many ladders?
No ladders. You can kill every cute animal you see in the forest, and upon killing them, you realize each one used to be a person before they entered.
Damn.
Mm.
Do you work for the postal service?
You are a metaphorical postal service for the spirit of the forest.
I'll take it.
Do you sometimes walk in the rain and sometimes feed on a tree frog?
Sometimes walk in the rain, yes. Sometimes feed on a tree frog. By feed, do you mean make roots grow through its skin in such a way that its eyeballs burst?
That's not how I eat.
You gotta try it.
You aren't enjoying
That's
Texas.
the,
You aren't enjoying Texas steak, my friend. You need to come down to El Paso.
Texan way. Okay, I hear you.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
On whatever that just was. Thank you so much
What
for
a
joining
professional
us.
podcast.
Xalavier, where can people find you? What are you making next? What are the 3 games that you have coming out this year?
And how long are their titles?
Yeah, and can we keep them to one word, please?
So, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, otherwise known just as 3. You can play that within the next few months. It will be in Steam Next Fest as well. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown comes out also within the next few months. You can wishlist that now. It will have a cool demo at Steam Next Fest. And finally, we have a co-op kaiju horror cooking game coming out this summer. And we have not announced the name of it yet.
Is co-op and cooking both spelled with a K? It's a co-op kaiju cooking, right?
Oh, that's too many Ks. You can't line those up in a row. We can't.
Acronyms are bad.
I already have Strange Scaffold as my studio name. I can't be adding other
You
abbreviations
can't go there.
to
No,
the
that's fair enough. I respect it.
But yeah, co-op kaiju horror cooking game. We have not announced the title of it, but that will be coming out this summer, and you can follow all that at Strange Scaffold, various places.
Can you give us
or
an
at
exclusive?
Rick
How
Nelson.
many words in the title of the kaiju cooking game?
2 currently.
He's learning.
Okay,
He's scoped.
he's moving in the right direction.
Unless, because I keep referring to it as the co-op kaiju horror cooking game, we just call it that.
That's a pretty good title. It is a pretty good title. You hate to admit it. Co-op kaiju horror cooking game. I buy it.
Alana.
I mean, I would do that as like a little subtitle, like tactical stealth action. I would put that as
Yeah,
the...
that's good too.
But
Yeah.
who would buy a game that has subtitle called Tactical Stealth Action?
Oh, I thought
That's
you
too
said
much.
self action, and I was like, is that tactically masturbating? Like, what are you implying there?
Is there any other way to masturbate?
Tactically.
That's-
I guess
Strategically.
it's always tactical. In theory. I also don't know if I ever told you this, Xalavier, but the El Paso Elsewhere soundtrack that I kept bugging you about when part 1 would release ended up being on my Spotify most played because it is incredible writing music. So when I am writing, I very frequently listen to the part 1, and it ended up that album / artist, sorry, I don't remember the musician's name.
We went by Lake Savage.
There you go, Lake Savage. Ended up being like in my top 5 most listened to because it's very good background writing music. It's moody. Good
I
stuff.
am honored. I'm struggling to believe you for the reasons
You want
that
proof?
like
She
Bitch,
does
bitch, I'll
lie. She
fucking-
does lie.
Well, that's what
She
the
does
internet's
lie.
saying. Let me shut the
God,
fuck
yeah,
up.
sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
specifically
Oh.
music permeating people's lives. People have told me about like they listen to the rap album, which is now also on Spotify for like.
It's annoying that you can do that as well. I just need to say that to your face. That is annoying that you're that good at that.
Thank
It
you.
annoys me.
But like the
Irks me.
people tell
I'm
me that
vexed.
they work out to it, and it's like, for
Huh.
some reason, people telling,
That's
people
cool.
telling me that they play my games. That's cool. But people telling me,
How many people find it?
I'm honored. I do believe you. It's just always really hard for me because music is just part of people's lives. People tell me, "Oh, I cook when I listen to music that you've worked on." That's the part where I go like, "Oh, so I was just singing and you were cooking and you were with your family? I said a bad word in that song."
Well, I can't find it, but I can't find my Wrapped now. I guess
I do
like,
believe you.
So there's no evidence that you're not lying.
I'm sure I
is
have a
what you're saying.
screenshot
Okay.
of it because I posted it on my Instagram story. And I think I may have even said, by the way, this is hit because it's really good writing music. It's just the vibes were impeccable. Very good stuff. So thank you for
RJ
that
Lake
too.
is a
Also
genius.
making good music. Hell yeah. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so it's at Strange Scaffold for my studio stuff. For me, it's at Rit Nelson, WRIT Nelson. And I think later today, I will be telling the story of how we are intentionally not putting a polished piece of art into Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 because it's a game about the process of game development, where the industry is at now. So we realized that a story beat would be more effective if we used the sketch that the artist sent us before they made the polished thing, because game development.
That's cool. Well, that will have been up a week ago because this goes up next Friday. Thank you so much for
Great.
joining us. I'm sure we'll have you again sometime. Maybe when some of your games come out this year, we can chat about them. I'm Alana Pierce, I'm a video game
But
writer.
not every time, to be clear. We can't commit to that many
Yeah,
times.
that's what are
I
we
would
gonna?
just be an additional
It's
co-host.
like 3
Yeah,
times.
that's just one a week at this point. Ridiculous. That's my video
Yeah.
game director. He's also a video game director. We will see you in 2 weeks.